So what's up, people, and another PC update sort of video. I haven't particularly updated my PC ever since the last video. But what I wanted to do with this video was to at least give you an update with regards to the cost that it's, or how much the PC has costed so far to update to what I have right now. And that might give you an idea of just sort of what the overall cost these days are to upgrade to this sort of build. And to give you an idea of how much of what I've paid can be actually put aside as miscellaneous stuff that you really don't need to do, and what the true upgrade to the performance would be. And before I do, though, I did want to thank a certain commenter in my last video. A commenter named DD Sam saw the Elita standing around inside my PC and made a comment that it looked very similar to the time Elita walked into the crashed Mars ship and saw the Berserker body in the movie Elita Battle Angel. And so I wanted to thank DD Sam for that nice comment, because I was like, hey, that's pretty interesting. And so I thought I would show just one quick one where I made the lighting appropriate so that it may look even closer than my last video in what it looked like inside the Mars ship. And yeah, I guess it looks pretty much like that. And little Alita is still kind of threatening me with that knife out in her hand. If I do anything nasty, then she'll probably wreak havoc on my PC. But anyway, yeah, thank you very much for that comment. And anyway, keeping on going. So, with regards to the overall cost of what I've done to upgrade, so I won't be including the cost of things that I've reused from what I used to have, and just talk about the upgrade, because one of the nice things about doing, building the rig is that you could utilize old parts that if you wanted to bring up during the upgrade, you don't have to upgrade the entire PC. Although I've mostly done that in this particular build. And you could leisurely upgrade as you go along. So that helps save up on costs, rather than if you buy a pre-built, you would have to buy the whole PC over and over again. And so yeah, I was looking at how much it's costed so far. Also, what I wanted to do was tally up all of the costs that I have so far. A lot of times when you see, let's build a $500 PC or something, they basically add up all the general components that you have, the CPU or the case or the power supply, and they don't go into all the smaller things that, yeah, maybe you don't need to get because you might get it with your motherboard, but then they go ahead and get these really nice looking connectors or whatever and say, well, this is the $500 build or something like that. And so what I wanted to do is, in this case, I will actually include all the costs of even the small things, such as the RGB strips or the RGB splitter or the SATA connector that I got special so that it would not clash in the wire management, all of that. So yeah, I wanted to see how much all of this costed. And so far, with the build that I have, it basically comes out to about $905. And that includes the CPU, the motherboard, the RAM, the power supply, the case, the SSD, the actual Noctua cooler, the SSD cooler, one additional fan for the Noctua cooler, the additional braided cables, the SATA connector that I got special so that I could do the wire management, the SATA power extension cable, which I got special so that I could do the wire management, RGB strips, RGB splitter, fan splitter, and fan RGB. That's the Fantech Halo. And so if you add it all together, that comes out to about $905. Which for my case, I'm perfectly fine with that because of the fact that I did want to go for a lot of the aesthetic bling. However, $905 is probably relatively overkill for a system that's running 2700X, Ryzen 2700, and 1060, right? That's what I had that I brought on from the previous build. And so I was looking at this a little bit more and wondering, okay, well, if I wanted to cut down on a lot of the budget and still get basically the exact same performance that I'm getting with the computer right now, then what can I actually remove? And so one of the easiest ones is to reduce the cost of the case. I mean, the case is nice, but it is relatively on the expensive side. I basically chose this case because it was one of the few that came in both black and white, and both had a 5.25 inch drive bay, and was actually a reasonably good build quality. But most people don't go for 5.25 inch drive bays anymore. They may not need a in-house DVD in their PC, and so if that's the case, then you could reduce the cost without reducing quality. There are some really, really good cases out there, which are around in the $70 to the $90 range. This one that I had purchased was around $160. So you could basically cut the cost in half for the case. You could also remove the aftermarket cooler and just go with the Wraith Prism cooler that comes with the 2700X. And you don't have to buy a SSD cooler. I did, and it's only a $10 difference, so it may not be all that much. But if you remove a lot of that, if you remove a lot of the bling, and go with just the basic components that come in the system, and still keep it a relatively high-end system. So I won't change the power supply for the moment, and keep it to a RM750X. I will bring the case down to about $70. Still keep the SSD around $100, but I will keep the CPU, motherboard, and RAM as the deal that I got at Micro Center during Black Friday. And then the price will come down to $590. So if you recall, in the current upgrade that I built, which came out to about $905, if you don't require the RGB strips and you don't require the special SATA special length cables that will make cable management easier, if you don't need to get braided cables and all of that other stuff that was miscellaneous to the performance of the actual rig, and you don't require a fractal design defined R6, but still can get a equally nice case, for much less cost, then you can see that you can bring down the price of the entire system without sacrificing any of the performance by letting go of these miscellaneous items. Yeah, it'll probably be louder, and it may not be able to cool as much because you did change the aftermarket Noctua cooler to Wraith Prism. But to be honest, unless you're going to go and overclock the heck out of it, the Wraith Prism is designed to work with the 2700, and the Wraith Prism is a RGB fan, and so you could even get your RGB straight from the cooler itself. And so by doing that, I haven't changed the CPU, I haven't changed the motherboard, I haven't changed the RAM. The power supply is still a very nice one. The case is around, I'm pricing at around $70, and the SSD is the price that I got for the SSD minus the cooler. And you don't need a CPU cooler, you don't need a SSD cooler, you don't need additional fans if you get a decent case, you don't need braided cables, and you don't need all that other stuff. and it comes out to $590. So that's pretty darn good to get to a relatively modern computer. You see a lot of people talk about budget builds, but this isn't all that budget of a build because we're still working with an 8-core 16-thread processor and 16 gigs of DDR4 3600 RAM on a relatively decent B450 motherboard. What I would suggest is instead of getting the MSI B450 Tomahawk, I would suggest to get the MSI B450 Tomahawk Max now, because the Max has a better BIOS, but it's no different in cost from the original Tomahawk. And so back then, the Max wasn't available, but once the Max came out, yeah, if I was to build this again, I would definitely go with the Tomahawk Max. Now, this is with, of course, the assumption that you're bringing a 1060 GTX 1060 along with you, like I did. But assuming that you don't have that, let's say that you need to get a GPU. Well, okay, so let's choose a relatively equivalent GPU. So something like a RX 580 is actually higher performance than a 1060. And you could get one for around $150 these days if you look hard enough. And so yeah, if you add that to the amount, then it comes out to about $740 for the build, which is still pretty nice because of the fact that you can run a good number of the top games, AAA games, at 1080p using this sort of setup. It may not be at the ultimate settings, but yeah, I mean, it definitely won't be at the lowest settings, and you could get away with it. And once again, this system would be actually more powerful than the system I'm working with because the RX 580 is a better performing graphics card than the GTX 1060. However, some people may not have $740 and still want to play with a decent level performance similar to what is going on. So in that case, yeah, I mean, there are ways to reduce the price. It may reduce the eventual potential quality, although not that much. It's one of these things where you do eventually pay a lot more for getting the additional quality in certain items. But if you can pick and choose well enough, then you could go for certain items that can reduce the price, still give you similar performance, and and get a decent PC. So one of the first things I would say is take advantage of the Ryzen 5 1600AF. Once again, it's basically a 2600, but it's labeled as a 1600. Make sure you get the AF version because of the fact that if you don't, you'll get a 14 nanometer 1600. If you get the AF version, then you do get the 12 nanometer Ryzen Plus, which is a 2600, labeled as a 1600, and that's for $85. And so for this build, this alternate build, I'm not going to assume that I could get things at Black Friday. I'm not going to assume that I could get things at Micro Center. So these are going to be relatively current prices that you could get items. And so for the motherboard, I can no longer afford B450 Tomahawk, MSI B450 Tomahawk, because that's around $114 if you get it at full price. But there are reasonable budget B450 micro ATX motherboards out there. And the one that I like is the ASRock B450 Pro 4. I think it's called the B450M Pro 4. And it's a micro ATX, which means it's a smaller motherboard, which may be nice because then you don't have to go for a gigantic case to put it in. You could go for a micro ATX case to put your motherboard in. So you're a lot more flexible with the choice of cases. You are limited to the number of PCI slots that you have, but you really these days only put in graphics card, right? Maybe you might put in a Wi-Fi card, since I don't think this motherboard has Wi-Fi, or you could go with one of those USB connected Wi-Fi connectors, right? Adapters, right? But in any case, this motherboard is supposed to be pretty nice. In fact, if you buy pre-builts, even from places like iBuyPower or CyberPower, some of those relatively gamer PC sort of builds, if you go in and look at the build, it doesn't matter if you get a 280 Ti or if you get a or 2080 Ti, I'm sorry, or if you get the top of the line Ryzen 9 processors, they'll still put it on most likely this ASRock motherboard, because nobody, when they're buying pre-builds, really seriously look at the motherboard. The only people who might look at the motherboard in a pre-build are people like me who build systems and then look and wonder what sort of motherboard is in there. So it is a budget board. It's definitely a budget board. But to be honest, unless you're going to go and overclock or try to overclock the the 1600 AF like crazy, there really is no reason to get some of these fancier motherboards. And to be honest, I think regardless of where your budget is, it's probably going to last as long as you will keep the computer, which is 4 to 5 years at least that the motherboard will last. And so for $80, which is what the price of this motherboard is, it's not bad, and it in fact will make it less expensive than the B450 Tomahawk, even at the Micro Center Black Friday price. And so yeah, that's actually a pretty nice deal. Now the RAM, I'm going to DDR4 3200 rather than a 3600, because there really is no reason to take it to that 3600 speed unless you're going for a Ryzen 3000 series processor. It won't be able to utilize that sort of speed, so might as well get 16 gigs of DDR4 3200 and save about $15. So that's about $60. The GPU I'm going to keep as the RX 580, so that's around $150. The power supply, if you don't need to go to a 80% gold, and you're okay to go down to a 80% bronze, rating, then there's some decent power supplies out there. And so long as you don't mind that it's a non-modular power supply, so looks might be a little bit less appealing, and cable management will be a little bit more difficult. But if you are willing to go with a non-modular power supply, then you could get a decent one for under $100. So example of one, for example, is the Thermaltake Smart. It's a 80 plus bronze, and it also is supposedly a decent power supply. I'm not sure if it's a fantastic power supply, but it'll probably get you through most anything. And so long as you're running around with a RX 580, which doesn't eat all that much power, you'll probably be okay. And if you go with a 650 watt power supply, in fact, you probably can even stick in a 2080 Ti, a $1,200 GPU, and still be able to run it with a 650 watt 80 plus bronze power supply. And so yeah, I think the Thermaltake one is pretty good. There's supposed to be some decent ones from Be Quiet and also from EVGA. The best thing to do for power supplies is to go to a website like JonnyGuru. I'll leave a link to JonnyGuru's website, and there they rate a ton of power supplies. So go for look for one that's affordable, see that it has a good rating, and then so long as they've done, it's from a reputable website like JonnyGuru, who does a really extensive test, then you're probably going to be in decent shape for that. So the power supply is about $70 if you go with the Thermaltake Smart. The case, I will go for about a $50 case, and I'm not going to go focus on whatever. There are some of those $70 cases. If you find one on a decent sale, then it'll probably drop to about $50. If not, by default, there's always something like the Fractal Design Focus G, which actually does have a 5.5 inch or 5.25 inch drive bay. It may not be the best build quality, but it's actually a decent airflow, I think, because it has a mesh front. And yeah, it may be a bit flimsy, but hey, this is a budget build that we're talking about. And so yeah, that I think will be okay. And that's around, I think, $60 or $50. You probably could get it for $50 if you get it on a sale. And the SSD, yeah, I'll go with a $90 1 terabyte 2.5 inch SATA SSD. And I've already talked about this in the past that you're really not going to see a difference in speed, especially if you're gaming, between the SATA SSD and the NVMe. So you might as well save some money and just go get a 2.5 inch SATA SSD. You could still find them for like $90 sometimes, if you look hard enough. And you definitely can find them for about $100. So I'm going to go with $90, assuming that I looked hard enough. And because I ported over spinning platter hard disk, I'm going to add one just because of the fact that 1 terabyte is nice, but it will be definitely nicer if you had 2 terabytes or even 3 terabytes. So a 2 terabyte hard drive, spinning platter, and a 1 terabyte SSD. 3 terabytes is pretty darn nice. And you could get 2 terabyte spinning platters sometimes for about $30 if you're lucky. $40 definitely you should be able to get one. And so yeah, if you add that all together, then you could still make a decent build for about $615. And you will probably find that you won't see that much of a performance difference between the rig that I have for $900, the rig that I talked about for $710, and the $615 system. Because, the reduction from a 3600 RAM to a 3200 RAM, you won't see the difference because you're not utilizing that speed advantage. The CPU, going from an 8-core 16 thread to a 6-core 12 thread is not going to diminish your performance that much because of the fact that recent games up till now haven't utilized all 8 cores for gaming. Most of the games will max out at around 6 cores. So if you have 2 additional cores, it's not going to make that much of a difference. And considering the fact that both the 2700 and the 1600 AF are both Ryzen Plus 12 nanometer processors, you probably will get similar performance in games. Now, for future, yes, the new games are starting to utilize more cores, so you might see a performance difference from that. But still, it's gonna play games reasonably well. And so yeah, for $615, you could have a system that basically will perform just like mine and play most any of the games out there at 1080p. Now, if we decided to go bare bones, then you can still go bare bones. In this case, I would get rid of the GPU and save $150 and change the 1600 AF to APU, something that actually has a graphics processor inside. And so something like the, if I remember right, the Ryzen 3200G, which is an APU, all-in-one CPU and GPU in the same chip. And the nice thing is from what I hear, the performance of these APUs are actually pretty darn good. It's actually better than having maybe a 5-year-old quad-core processor and taking one of the cheaper one of the standalone video cards that you might be able to buy out there in Newegg or Amazon and put it together. The Ryzen 3200G actually will outperform it using built-in graphics processor. So it's not bad. It's not great. You're definitely going to get a performance hit compared to going with the RX 580, of course. But to be able to play at slightly lower settings, if you want to go down from the 1080p, you'll definitely be in a much better situation. But yeah, overall, it still will play games okay, from what I hear. I think I'll link you to some of the budget builds that a lot of these enthusiasts has built and the benchmarks that they show. Now the motherboard I'll keep with the B450 Pro ASRock, and the RAM I would like to keep it at about the same 3200. You might be able to go down to something a little bit less, but I wouldn't go from 16 gigabytes down to 8, which is what a lot of people will do. It's because if you use an APU, since it doesn't have its own internal dedicated graphics memory, it'll utilize the RAM, part of the RAM for the memory. So if you only have 8, you're definitely going to get a performance hit on this. However, if you go with that, let's say about a slower slower RAM for about $50 for 16 gigabyte, then you should be in okay shape. And as far as the SSD, I will go with 500 gigabyte SSD, which you could get for about $50, maybe even cheaper than that. And a case, we're now talking about a $40 case. And it's not easy to find a halfway decent $40 case. I think Linus Tech Tips recently was looking at $35 cases, so I'll leave a link for that particular video as well. But we're talking about the barest bone budget here. So for that situation, and since you don't have a video card that can potentially heat up the system a lot, then I think you will be in okay shape. The power supply I'll keep still as a $70 power supply because of the fact that when you upgrade, a lot of times people will forget to upgrade the power supply, and all of a sudden what was working up till now, when you add a dedicated video card, suddenly stops working because your cheap power supply cannot handle the extra load. So at this point, I will at least get a halfway decent power supply, so I'll still stay with a Thermaltake Smart at 650 watts. It's super overkill for this particular system, but the moment you put in a graphics card, it won't be. And so this is giving you a bit of a upgradability in the future. And by doing that, you could get the price to about $395. So you could go from a $905 system like I have been upgrading up till now, and take it, all the way down. You'll get a performance hit by the time you get to $395. If you go down to about $600, you probably won't see much of a performance hit. If you take it all the way down to $395, you will, but you're still gaming at $395 using most of the modern games, at halfway reasonable settings at 1080p. And so that gives you some idea of some of the flexibilities that you have. And you could pick and choose where you want to put the quality. You might want to go eventually upgrade from a APU to a dedicated GPU, in which case, you go back and get the $85 1600 AF rather than the 3200G, and then you put the money into something like a 570X, right? RX 570, which is a little bit less powerful than a 1060, but it's pretty decent, and it's only $100 at that point. So you save $50 on the $610, and you could get it down to about in the $500 range, which you often see by a lot of these people, enthusiasts that are building these sorts of rigs. So again, it gives you an area, and that's one of the places where I find building to be useful. A lot of times people will say, well, it's cheaper than buying pre-built. Well, not really. You could find pre-builts that are around the same price for the similar sort of components. It's definitely a lot less expensive than the one that I built because you're not buying all that blingy stuff, right? But the nice thing about the building yourself is, of course, you could build for a similar price knowing that the components you bought were of decent quality. You're at the mercy of the manufacturer, who buys sometimes the most questionable things, especially in the area of power supply, motherboard, cooling. Those are the three areas, and the case. Those are the three areas that, or four areas that they may actually skimp on. And so you know that you're going to get a decent rig. And the nice thing is at that point, you're able to upgrade whatever you want, whenever you want, at the speed that you want to go with. So if you purchased a budget system for about $500, and if you eventually want to go through to an enthusiast system, let's get a RTX 2700 Super. Yeah, you may have to upgrade the power supply. You may have to upgrade the graphics card. But at least you know where you'll need to upgrade, and you won't have to upgrade everything. And once again, if you pay only about $70 for a case, you can get some good cases out there like the NZXT H500, the Fantex P300, the Be Quiet PureBase PureBase 500. I think that's what it's called. And I think just recently I saw a sale on a Cooler Master Master Box for about that sort of price. And that's a pretty nice case. And so all of these four are very nice cases. I would say that they're in the quality similar to the things that I got with my Define R6. And yet they're a lot less expensive. If you're willing to pay $30 more and get a $100 case, then you could get one of the most popular and well-reviewed cases out there, which is the Lian Li LanCool 2 for about $100. And so, yeah, I mean, you can pick and choose and determine what you want to upgrade. And by using that ability and only upgrading to the things that you want to, and then waiting for the other things when you can afford it later or when you want to get it later, then that gives you the ability to constantly upgrade your system without having to shell out another $500 to $1,000 to get that sort of upgrade. I mean, the cheapest systems pre-built that you can get that has a RTX 2070 Super is going to cost you about $1,300 to $1,500. And so that's significantly more expensive to buy things where you don't need an additional case, where you don't need an additional power supply. So long as you got a good one in the beginning, it'll last for many, many years, and you could reuse it again in the next rig. And so by doing so, again, it may not save you money in the first build, but it gives you enough flexibility to, one, get decent components, because even at the lower prices, you know which ones are the decent components. And then second, yeah, I mean, you only need to upgrade what you need, which then does save you money than buying another pre-built again. And then, of course, if something goes wrong, since you've built it, you probably will know how to troubleshoot it much better than if you bought a pre-built. Now, the one last thing I would suggest, if you haven't built your own PC before and you're worried about what parts to buy, then the one website I would suggest is PC Parts Picker. It's a website that actually provides input from many builders and shows examples of recent builds that a lot of people have built. And so they range in various prices. And so what you can do is go into many of these examples of what other people have built, and that will give you not only what parts seem to be popular, but which combination of parts seem to combine together to be compatible. If it works for 5 or 6 builders in PC Parts Picker, most likely when you buy the parts, it'll probably work for you as well. So I'll leave a link to that particular website as well, and if you've never been there, yeah, go take a look. It's pretty fun. You could take a look at all these other people's builds. So anyway, that's about it with regards to this video. That gives you some idea of, the types of costs that you get, you may have to pay to get the type of performance that you will be expecting depending upon what sort of PC that you build. Of course, any of these PCs, aside from gaming, are perfectly fine for doing office work and all that, so long as you load the right software. You should be able to do all that as well. As for me, I'm probably eventually going to upgrade the video card to something like a RX 5700 XT. They're slowly starting to come down in price. So right now it's around the $400 range, and so that'll shoot my price up to about $1,300, which is about, again, similar prices to a pre-built. And that's interesting, even with all the bling that I put on and the additional cable management quality stuff. it still comes out to be about a comparable price to a lot of the pre-built systems that you see on Amazon. Anyway, that's about it for this video. Sorry it took so long, but I just wanted to go over the various prices and costs for a PC. And I still want to make that video with regards to the heatsink. Does a SSD, NVMe, M.2 system need a heatsink or not? And I'll be making that in the future. I hope you join me at that time. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, yeah, please post it in the comments section below. And I'll try to make some more videos in this area. And I hope you join me at that time. And until then, happy computer building, and as always, Jaya, nice day, everyone.